Now, last week in chapter 19, Jesus was confronted by a wealthy young ruler who asked him what he needed to do to be made right with God. Essentially, that's what he was saying. How can I be made right with God? And Jesus told him to sell his goods, give the proceeds to the poor, and to follow after him. This was his advice to this young man, specifically, sell your goods, give your proceeds to the poor, and follow after me. Well, the young man was a ruler, but the wealth ruled over him. And so he walked away sorrowful. And afterward, one of Jesus' disciples, Peter, asked him, what did they would receive? What shall we receive, having left all to follow you, Jesus? What are we going to receive for this? And Jesus answered them, and I think it was the most interesting answer, and not exactly what they were expecting, I imagine. Their reward would be after this present pilgrimage or after this earthly ministry. It would be at the regeneration, Jesus says, when Christ comes back to reign. What we understand when we read through the book of Revelation, in Revelation 20, verse 4, is that 1,000-year reign, that Jesus will come back and reign. We're told in Revelation 20, verse 4, that, and I saw thrones, and they sat on them, and judgment was committed to them, and they lived and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. So he speaks this to the disciples, and this was their reward. We've left all to follow you. Well, you will have 12 thrones, right? That's what he tells these disciples. But not only do the disciples look forward to a reward, but Jesus goes on to say that everyone who suffers loss for his sake would be rewarded. And he says 100-fold is what Jesus says. And that many who are first will be last, and the last will be first. This is what he told them in chapter 19, at the very end. Right? And many who are first will be last, and the last will be first, speaking regarding this reward system that will take place. But Jesus now goes on in verse 20, or chapter 20, to illustrate the idea of reward and order of reward with another kingdom parable. And so let's dive into the kingdom parable found in Matthew chapter 20. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landlord who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. Now, when he had agreed with the laborers for a denarii a day, he sent them into the vineyard. And he went out about the third hour and saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And he said to them, "You also go into the vineyard, and whatever is right I will give you." So they went. And again he went out about the 6th hour and the 9th hour, and he did likewise. And about the 11th hour he went out and found others standing idle and said to them, "Why are you standing idle all day?" And they said to him, "Because no one's hired us." And he said to them, "You also go into the vineyard, and whatever is right you will receive." In verse 8, so when evening had come, the owner of the vineyard said to his steward, "Call the laborers and give them their wages, beginning with the last to the first." And when those came who had hired at the 11th hour, they each received a denarii. But when the first came, they supposed that they would receive more, and they likewise received each a denarii. And when they had received it, they complained against the landowner, saying, "These last men have worked only 1 hour, and you paid them equal to us, and we borne the burden of the heat all day." But he answered one of them and said, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarii? Take what is yours and go your way. If I wish to give to the last man the same as you, is it not lawful for me to do what I wish to do with my own things? Or is your eyes evil because I am good?" So the last will be first, and the first last. For many are called, but few are chosen. So you have this employer, this landowner, who has this harvest that must be brought in, gathered in. And so Jesus tells a story how he goes out. He needs to take care of his business, needs to get his crop brought in. And so he goes out at dawn, at 6 a.m. is probably the time frame here. He goes at dawn to get the, or was it 6:30? No. I think it's 6 here. So he goes and he collects the those who are the day laborers. They were waiting. That's what they did. They were waiting for jobs during the harvest. And so he goes in and he grabs it. I don't know if these guys were more eager or what, more qualified skills. I don't know. But whatever the reason, he picks these guys and says, "Go to my field, I'll give you a day's labor, a fair day's wages," which is a denarii. Right? It was a fair day. No one complained. They'll go, "Hey, yeah, okay, we're going to do this. That sounds like a deal. We're on," right? It was a contract, and they jumped into the field and they began to harvest. Well, I don't know if they began to collect and harvest, and he started saying, "Well, man, I don't know if we're going to do it." He's calculating the hours, thinking, I don't think we're going to. We have to make this before the rains. We have to get this collected. So he goes back in at the third hour, which is at 9 a.m., and he finds those standing idle, and he says, "Hey, come on, I'm going to hire you. Let's go to work." And these guys, "I'll pay you what's fair." Doesn't even tell him what, just, "I'll pay you what's fair." And the guys, they jump in, and they jump in the field, begin working. He's assessing again, as the good employer is doing, trying to figure out his needs. And he says, "I need some more laborers." And he goes back in at the 6th hour, which is at noon. And grabs more, and "I'll pay you what's fair if you just come and do your work on my vineyard. I'll pay you what's fair." Still, he's like, "I don't know if I'm going to make this. I've got to get some more laborers." And he goes back in at the very end of the day, this mad dash. He's rushing, beating the daylight. And so he, and lots of daylight savings jokes were about to come in there, but I dropped them. And he said, "I need somebody to get this done." And so at the 9th hour, at 5 o'clock late, he says, "Hey, I'll pay you what's fair, right? Come to work." And so, they said, "Okay, great. We're with you. We're going to go do the work," right? And so they go to the field. Barclay tells us that if the harvest was not gathered before these rains broke, we're not told there isn't, but there's an urgency that you see that's kind of pressing here. So we just assume that there's something pressing, that he has to get everything done by the end of this day, and quite possibly the rain, because rains would ruin the crop. And so you would go into this frenetic kind of fast-paced race against time to get the harvest in, and it was common that anybody standing around, you would just would have grabbed them, you would have hired them, brought them in, "Come on, do the job." This was a common story, Barclay says, that Jesus was telling. This wasn't just some made up, it's hard for us to understand. It was common during that day that this kind of thing would take place. And so, he tells them, "I'll give you a denarii to those in the first," but then later he just tells them, "I'll give you what's fair." Well, you see what takes place is the last, he tells the steward to pay the last first. We'll start with the last. "Here you go, steward. Here's your money." He has the bag of coins, denarii, if you will, and he's like, "Okay, you guys who came at the the last hour here, come up. We're going to pay you." And so the guys are coming up, and he pulls out the payment, puts it in the hand of this worker, and the worker was like, "Whoa! Whole day's wages for this?" Stoked, man, this guy's awesome. And they're all like all those last hour guys, because we're not told how many there were. There was just, there were multiple. And they all had it, and they were like, yeah, high-fiving each other, as they're leaving. Man, that's a good employer, a good landlord. Right? And then one by one, they start coming in. And the guys who came at noon, the guys that came at noon, they put up, and we're assuming, because it doesn't say any different, that they gave him a denarii, right? And they didn't complain, The guys that came at the 6th hour and the guys who came at the 3rd hour, they didn't complain about the denarii, right? Well, because the guys who came at noon got double time. when you think about it. I mean, they got paid double for a full day's for a half day's labor. And so they're like, yes, all right. This is great. They didn't complain. And the guys who came, at the third hour, the 9 a.m., well, they got time and a half. I mean, they got paid for a full day for, 3/4 of the day. It wasn't bad, not a bad day, But these guys who came early, man, they're put off with it. They're just super, super bent out of shape about it. There's some sort of like entitlement that's coming on. Wait, you know what? I know I told you that I would do this for a denarii. I know I contracted with you that I would work all day for a fair day's, and I know you're being fair with me but there's a sense of entitlement. If you pay this guy that, then you pay, and there was this Jesus calls it an evil eye. Is there an evil eye? It comes from Deuteronomy when someone would covet their neighbor's wife or goods, that's where it comes from, the idea that you're kind of, you're jealous of what somebody else has, right? The landlord did exactly what was promised. Is it not lawful for me to do what I wish with my own things? Or is your eye evil because I am good? Wow. I mean, the landlord was fair. This is a remarkable parable that illustrates this. It's not the amount of time that you serve or the importance or prominence of your position that determines your reward. Rather, it's your faithfulness to the task the Lord has given you to perform, regardless of how small, short, or insignificant it might seem. We need to give room for the Lord. We need to make room for the Lord, trusting that he is perfect in his ways, perfect in his handling with us. We also need to give room for several different things. When it comes to vengeance, and so often we want to handle, say someone mistreats us or a family member or a friend or something, and we want to enact vengeance. And Romans tells us that we should give room for the Lord to enact vengeance. Right? He's perfect. He's perfect in his ways and how he deals with things. We're not perfect. Usually we're like, oh yeah, you're going to do that with me? Well, I'm going to do it twice. It's hard, We're going to enact it. That's the way. But God is perfect in how he enacts things. We need to give room for the Lord when he blesses others. Man, so often I'm guilty of this. I look at these guys. I look at this one pastor. He's a young man that I've worked with for years. He's the pastor of the Destin campus, and Neil Spencer. And the guy is just gifted in so many different ways. He's an administrator. He's a worship leader. Can preach, can teach the word phenomenally, and he's 6 foot. And I can't help it. I'm like, man, Lord, wow, the guy can do all of those things, and he's 6 foot. My glorified body. That's what I'm 6'2". But like, and so, and you have a tendency when you look at other people, you see what they have when you see the Joneses next door, right? You see what they've been given. You see the giftings they have. You see the houses they have, the cars, the wives? Al-Qaeda? No, not wives. But you look at them, you see what they have, and you go, wow, look how God has blessed these people. And you kind of begin to think God has ripped you off. And you stop, you don't step back and go, wow. You know what? Look what the Lord blessed me with, a full day's wage. And we'll step back in eternity. We'll look back and we'll see that we got way more than that denarii. We got way more than that full day's wage for those who trusted him and was faithful in doing the work that he's given us to do in his field as we put our hands on his plow. We have to give room for the Lord to work in blessing and vengeance. We have to give room for the Lord to work in rewarding. Jesus is talking about this whole reward system that God has enacted as they're all jockeying for position, right? As they're trying to figure out how they've gotten what they've gotten and how they've earned it and this and that, trying to figure it out. Isaiah 58:8 tells us this: "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor your ways my ways, says the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." This can either frustrate us when we see God doing something that we don't think is fair, where we can be comforted, knowing that he is perfect, that his ways are perfect, his reward and his handling of me is perfect and way more than I deserve. He says that the last will be first and the first will be last. Peter and the disciples, they knew that they had given up a great deal to follow Jesus. Peter wanted to know what they would get in return. And through this parable, Jesus assured Peter and the disciples that they will be rewarded. But the principle of many who are first will be last and the last first. This is the principle that he kind of lays out in chapter 19:30, meant that God may not reward as man expects, even as the parable illustrates. For many are called, but few are chosen. This was said in the context of the illustration of illustrating God's grace. And Jesus emphasized that both the calling and the choosing of God is based on his grace, especially his choosing. But don't think for a moment that the laborers were forced to go away. They chose to go as well. Although he's speaking of rewards here and not necessarily salvation. We move from this parable, it kind of moving on, it kind of all builds together, comes together. But next, we begin to move again geographically from the Jordan River Valley to Jerusalem. But it also kind of takes a change in speed and pace as the time frame from here on out starts to speed up, move forward to the crescendo, which we know of as the cross. So we move on in verse 17. You see that now Jesus, going up to Jerusalem, took the 12 disciples aside on the road and said to them, "Behold, we're going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be betrayed to the chief priests and the scribes, and they'll condemn him to death and deliver him to the Gentiles to mock and scourge and crucify him. And on the third day, he will rise again." So this is that final trip to Jerusalem. He's been to Jerusalem before. We see in the other gospel accounts is more of a chronological order. He's been to Jerusalem before, but this is that final trip there. And when they get to Jerusalem, those culminating events of his life, the culminating events of the life of Jesus are going to take place. They're going to unfold and unravel quickly. He's been with them for almost 3 years. And he finds it necessary, as of recently we see, finds it necessary to draw them now into a more intimate fellowship with his suffering. It's almost like he can't contain it. He'll be teaching them and he'll just go into, hey, this is what's going to happen. This is what's going to go down in Jerusalem. We're going to go there. Right? I'm going to suffer. Right? He set his face on Jerusalem, knowing exactly what waits for him there. And he prophesied so accurately of what would take place. This was the third time Jesus stops. He stops what he's doing, he stops what he's teaching, and he addresses his disciples and tells them that he must go to Jerusalem and die. But there seems to be this kind of progressive revelation in this prophecy as he's speaking it forth. In chapter 16 of Matthew, Jesus says he's going to go to Jerusalem, suffer from the religious leaders, die, and rise again on the third day. And repeats himself a little bit in 17, pretty much the same wording, but then he goes on to add and give us a little more details here and deliver him to the Gentiles to mock and to scourge and to crucify. What he adds to this prophecy. Luke's account of the same passage here adds that they will spit on him. He gives us such details, right? Such details. Spurgeon says, Jesus predicted these specific aspects of his coming agony, which on a human level he could not arrange. They plucked his hair, they smote his cheeks, they spat in his face. Mockery could go no farther. It was cruel, cutting, cursed scorn. No man could have planned these events. Some will speculate, some will say that. Oh yeah, all the prophecies happened because Jesus, he mapped it out, I'm more impressed with that. That he would map out in such a fashion, out of his control. He was placed into the hands of the religious leaders and to the Gentiles. Amazing details he lays out his own death and how he would die. But apparently the disciples didn't really listen when Jesus said these things. Their expectation was so focused on Jesus establishing an immediate political kingdom. And these words from Jesus were so contrary to their anticipation. These words just kind of went right over their heads. Because after Jesus said these things, a Jewish mama comes up to him making a request. Here we have the mother of Zebedee, verse 20. The mother of Zebedee's sons came to him with her sons, kneeling down and asking something from him. And he said to her, "What do you wish?" And she said to him, "Grant that these two sons of mine may sit, one on your right and the other on your left in your kingdom." But Jesus answered and said, "You do not know what you ask. Are you able to drink the cup that I am about to drink and be baptized with the baptism that I'm to be baptized with?" They said to him, "We are able." And so he said to them, "You will indeed drink my cup and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with. But to sit on my right and don't sit on my left is not mine to give, but is for those of whom is prepared by my Father." So Mrs. Zebedee was one of these regular mamas who kind of tagged along with the group. She would hang with the disciples. And we find her at Matthew 27. She's part of the group. She's there with them. And Mark's account tells us in chapter 10, the same parallel passage, that the boys actually approached Jesus with this question. That's what Mark tells us. So either way, either that they pressured her to approach the Lord, go lobby for us, right? Go press the Lord to see if he can pull some strings for us, mama. Or she pressured them, Kind of, I think it leans more that way if you know a lot of Jewish mamas. Right? That she was kind of a pushy mama maybe. The mother of James and John came with a request that would make most mamas proud and most sons happy, right? Thinking they were going to have some great reward with being at the right and the left of the king. But you get the idea that she's completely not tracking with Jesus here, not paying attention to what he's been sharing, what he's been teaching, what he's been saying all along. Jesus gets done talking about his great sacrifice, his great suffering that he's about to go endure. They're going to scourge me. I'm going to suffer. I'm going to die. I'm going to be crucified, right? Are you not hearing this? I'm telling you, the third time I'm saying this, I'm telling you this. And Mrs. Z is more concerned with her son's great honor and position. Grant that these two sons of mine may sit, one on your right hand and the other on your left hand in your kingdom. She wanted prominent positions for them in the messianic administration of Jesus. The right hand and the left hand suggest proximity to the king so as to share his prestige, his power. Maybe she just couldn't get out of her mind the earlier teaching of rewards that Jesus was talking about. The thrones. There's going to be thrones. John and James, you're going to sit on thrones. Who cares about the death and scourging? Maybe that's, go for it, right? Who cares about the crucifixion? Thrones, think thrones, right? And maybe she can't get that out of her head. It's like, well, if there's going to be thrones, then maybe you guys can sit on the prominent throne. More power, more position, more authority. Jesus responds, with a very sobering question. Do you know what you're asking? Do you have any idea what I'm talking about? Are you able to drink the cup that I'm about to drink and be baptized with the baptism that I am to be baptized with? Are you sure that you want the cup of death and the baptism, the identification? The Easter Sunday is not going to be this, right? Okay, it's identifying with the Lord's death and resurrection. That's what baptism means, to identify with. And can you identify with this pain and suffering? They said they understood, but it really kind of appears to me that, they answered really too quickly, I think. Do you understand the pain and suffering that you're going to have to endure? We do. Whoa, wait a minute. Take some time, think about it, right? Why don't you just watch the next couple of days, right? But so they said, yeah, we do. And Jesus says, okay, then you'll drink of my cup and follow me in great suffering. But I cannot secure a position of authority in the heavenly arena. That's my Father's doing. We read in the book of Acts that Herod stretched forth his hands against the church and had James beheaded. That's one of the two. John actually lived the longest of all of the apostles, but endured great suffering. If you read the traditions of John, the traditions tell us that they tried to kill him in multiple fashions, but the one that sticks out of my head is they boiled him in oil. Ouch. And then, after trying to kill him and failing with many attempts, they banned him to the Isle of Patmos, which if you guys don't know, that was it was a prison camp for mining coal, it was a work camp. He labored there, and he was still a man laboring in a work camp, mining coal for Rome. And that's when the Lord Jesus came to him and gave him the book of Revelation on that banished island. Great suffering, though. But what amazes me here is the submission of Jesus. The submission of Jesus to the Father. Jesus is God. Jesus is God. He was the Son of God. He is God. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God. The Word was God. He tabernacled amongst us, became flesh, took on flesh, tabernacled amongst us, walked amongst us, and died for us. He was God, God the Son. But yet he continually surrenders and submits to God the Father's will. It's the most baffling, amazing thing to try to wrap your head around. He was God, but yet he said, I say only what the Father wants me to say. I do only what the Father wants me to do. Oh no, it's not my time to know the day and the hour when I'm to come back to the Father's time, right? He submits and surrenders to the Lord. What an example. What an example of greatness. He gives us here. He begins to talk about greatness, humility, and serving. And then he goes on to demonstrate that greatness in his humility and his serving. In verse 24, it says that, and when the 10 heard this, they were greatly displeased with the two brothers. But Jesus called them to himself and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who are great exercise authority over them. Yet it shall not be so amongst you. But whoever desires to become great among you, let him be your servant. And whoever desires to be first among you, let him be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. The 10 were incensed. The 10 were greatly displeased, we're told. And so Jesus, he gathers them all together, all 12 of them together, right? Gathers them together. kind of addresses this issue, this concern that's going on. Yeah, these guys mistakenly thought that that a unique honor had just been bestowed upon James and John. Kind of, sort of, right? Great suffering, right? You'd have thought that if they heard it all, they'd have been like, yeah, go ahead, Sounds fun. And then the anger of these 10, it most likely kind of sprang up out of this sense of pride and jealousy and not humility here. Jesus saw their intentions, saw their heart, cut right through it. And plus, these guys were in fear. They were missing out on something, right? Jesus says, the world is concerned about positions, authorities, and lording over one another, but this shouldn't be amongst you. Their desire for position and status reveals that they did not yet know the nature of Jesus, especially in regards to leadership and power. Now, I learned from one of the greatest pastors ever. I speak it boldly. Why? Because I learned under him. I watched him in person. His name is Pastor Chuck Smith. He was one of the greatest examples of a pastor. The founder of the Calvary Chapel movement. And you never know, there's thousands and thousands of Calvary Chapels. And this man was such a humble guy. Such a humble man. When I was at the Bible college, I learned a lot from his teaching, went through the entire Bible with him. But also, he was known for pastors coming into the church, and if you were a pastor coming on staff, he would put a plunger in one hand and a broom in the other hand. Welcome aboard, Wait a minute, I've got to, divvy up those brooms. Come on, And so, he would teach them servanthood. I want to teach the Bible. Good, teach it to the urinal first, right? And then you'll be ready for Sunday school, whatever, and he would do that. But he didn't just do it. He wasn't just a pastor like so many who bark orders and say, you have to do this and you have to do that. And no way, he would go and have a plunger too, right? Right? He was a man of example. At the Bible college, it wouldn't be abnormal to see him up at the Bible college moving boulders around, getting the intermittent stream ready for the winter snows. Because then it melts, it has to go somewhere. He would be shoveling, raking, picking up cigarette butts around the campus and such. From Bible college students, right? One time I was at a pastor's conference, the students were the legwork, and we were washing dishes in the back, and we were overwhelmed. And all the pastors kind of ate and did their thing and left. Chuck Smith came in the back, put an apron on, 80 years old, and begins washing dishes. Didn't talk much, but washing dishes with us. What an example, right? What an example that he learned from Jesus. And I learned from him. He says, follow me as I follow Jesus. Jesus says, and whoever desires to be first among you, let him be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. In the kingdom community, status, money, popularity, I should say degrees also, should never be the prerequisites for leadership. Humble service is the great prerequisite as shown by Jesus in his own ministry. Jesus already equated greatness with humility in chapter 18, saying that we must come to him, if we want to come into the kingdom of heaven, we must come to him like a little child, right? A very dependent, vulnerable, and humble existence a little child is. But here he takes it a bit further with application. You must be a servant if you want to be great. You must be a servant. We should be those who are not clawing our way to the top of the kingdom, trying to outdo each other, but rather trying to outserve each other. In doing so, we identify with Jesus and reveal the heart of our Lord. The story is told of a little boy who was frantically drawing, just drawing, and mom kept walking by doing her chores and see him drawing, and finally after a while, she pokes her head and says, "Honey, what are you drawing? You've been at that for hours." He says, I'm drawing God. And she's like, "Oh, honey, no one's seen God. No one's ever seen God." And he says, "Well, they will when I'm done." Right? But the idea is this is the idea with us. People say, I don't see God. Hopefully, when they see us, they'll see Jesus. They'll see God. Or do they see the things of the world? Do they see how the world acts and go, not much different, right? This is convicting. Highly convicting. It's for this reason that I never use the word reverend to define myself and my position. The government does, the IRS does, but I don't. Why we prefer, Calvary Chapels prefer to be called pastors or ministers, right? Nobody is reverend but God. Jesus defines those that follow him as ministers or servants. And if I'm a leader amongst the ministers, then I should be leading by serving, right? This is a very convicting, sobering check on us ministers and leaders in the fellowship. That we're setting the pace and the example, they follow us as we follow Jesus, right? Heavy. Keeps us in check, though, right? Because we're followers of Jesus, then we're all ministers, right? We all should be serving. And us leaders, all the more so. So we will conclude the passage, our message today in this last passage of Scripture as he kind of moves on from his teaching time. And we read now in verse 29 that as they went out of Jericho, a great multitude followed him, and behold, 2 blind men sitting by the road. And when they heard that Jesus was passing by, they cried out, saying, "Have mercy on us, O Lord. Have mercy on us, Son of David." And when the multitude warned them that they should be quiet, but they cried out all the more, saying, "Have mercy on us, O Lord, Son of David." So Jesus stood still and called them and said, "What do you want me to do for you? What will you have me do for you?" And they said, "Lord, that our eyes may be open." So Jesus had compassion and touched their eyes. And immediately their eyes received sight, and they followed him. So he moves on. He's moving south, down, but then he'll be moving up to Jerusalem, as you always go up to Jerusalem. And Jericho was a beautiful desert oasis located about 15 miles out of Jerusalem. A certain bush grew there that was known to have medicinal value for treating blindness. It's most likely for this reason that in Jesus' day, you will always see a large number of blind folks in Jericho. Now, whether this bush actually had medicinal purposes or not, we're not sure. But they would gravitate to whatever they could find. I mean, you try everything, when you're desperate. And so a large number of them here. Luke's account says, kind of brings out one of these blind men. He's blind Bartimaeus, There's 2 of them here in this case, in this instance. He doesn't single any one of them out. Matthew doesn't. He says that the crowd is coming by. They are, the blind men are hearing what's going on. They're hearing the buzz. And maybe this desperateness, destitute, the bush isn't helping, whatever. And then Jesus is going to Jerusalem, and they begin to kind of step out in faith, and they begin to address him, crying out at loud, we're told, crying out loud, so loud that the crowd begins to try to shut him down. I mean, Jesus normally, when someone would say, "You are the Son of the living God, you're the Messiah," he would say, "Hey, quiet down right now, He doesn't say that to these guys this time. No. Instead, it catches his attention. And the more that they cried out and the crowd told him to shut up, they cried out all the more. Well, the Greek word here for cry is the same word that a woman would use when she's given birth, okay? And I've heard that 3 times. Good Lord. Okay, that's a cry. I'm telling you, it gets your attention. It got Jesus' attention here. Have mercy on us, O Lord, Son of David. These men went without sight, but they had incredible insight. They recognized him as their Messiah. And they were desperate to be healed. They just ignored the crowd to stop. They kept crying out. And Jesus, he stood still. Jesus had mercy on them. Jesus gave them sight. Oh, and they turned and they followed him. If you haven't already cried out to Jesus, if you're here this morning, you haven't cried out to Jesus, I encourage you to cry out to him. Don't let another day go past. I have no idea when our days are up. I encourage you. Maybe you haven't done it in a while. I think it's something that we need to do constantly, that we cry out to the Lord. That we don't grow content in our condition because we have conditions. I say they're blind conditions. So begin to track in the things of the world and entertain the thoughts of the mind, the heart, and the people of the world. We get this condition. The glaucoma kind of clouds our vision sometimes. I encourage you to cry out to him. Believe me, when you cry out to him, no matter your condition, he will stand still. He'll turn to you. And know that he has such mercy on you. He demonstrated it on the cross when he died for your sins. And like these blind men, don't be discouraged when the world and those around you try to shut you up, right? But cry out the more. And finally, guys who have cried out to him, who've recognized him, follow him. You know, the rich young ruler, he declined to follow Jesus. But these men realized the value of sight and their real purpose to follow Jesus. Many are called, but few are chosen. I believe the Lord has called each one of us for a greater purpose, something greater than ourselves, something bearing eternal purpose and great reward. But few choose to believe, and even fewer choose to follow him. And be a follower of Christ this week, guys. Be a follower of Christ. And lead by practicing ministry where you go. Because this is where ministry takes place. It's here, but it's also out there when you leave. Practice ministry out there. And how do you do that? Man, serve those around you. It's powerful. It's people's attention. Why are you doing that? Well, then you can give them a reason. Well, here's why. Because Jesus did it. And he died for me. I'm following him because he gave me sight. And then let this verse kind of permeate and let you walk out the door with this verse today and this week, that the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give of his life as a ransom. He loves us so much. We serve such an amazing God who came to serve and to save, and not just to say, hey, gimme, 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 gimme. Let's stand in prayer. Let's stand in prayer.